Welcome back to the reading of my recent novel, The Use and Abuse of Laura Endicott. This is the climactic chapter, the 11th, Elysium Enacted, Scene 1. We had not seen Olivia over the course of the first 2 days of our return, and her sister had duly informed us that she was confined to her bed due to being feverish, and having gotten up in the night somewhat disoriented, and then striking her face into one of the bedposts, leaving a significant bruising round a small contusion just above her left cheek. Sarah seemed very careful in elucidating both the extent of her sister's injuries and precisely how they had been affected, but I sloughed it off, later iterating such to Philip, who also took them with nonchalance, though I could tell he manifested concern for someone whom he had not yet met. In the interim, we had been invited to join Phipps and his lady friend at the very same public house in which Philip and I first met. This last seemed like a world ago, though it was just past 4 months. Philip had suggested, rather importunately, that we become officially engaged over the summer and then let that stand until he had been given some reassurances about the permanence, or lack thereof, of his upcoming teaching position. He seemed quite relaxed about it, and told me that he was fixated upon hearing me play for the first time, which would occur the very next night as planned by myself and Sarah. This would be the first full concert, so to speak, with the entire household, including all of its new staff, present at audience. "I am unduly nervous about the whole thing," I murmured, as we awaited to be joined by our other pairing. Philip had his arm around my shoulders in the lovely, if ill-mannered ways of the working classes, but I did not object. After all, we were young and handsome together, and in a tavern of all places, and if we ever left Cambridge and its surrounds, as I was still very much hoping to do, this frontage and its specific table would forever be our place. "Greetings, fellow travellers. This is Miss Emma Thorne's schoolmistress. We met on a case, if you can imagine." Phipps was merry, and it was almost infectious. "Peter exaggerates, though I did spend one evening with him chasing after what turned out to be a deer." Miss Thorne was even younger than I, so I was momentarily without words, though Phipps was himself around Philip's age. Yes, red herring there, I fear. But speaking of which," he began, as we were served our food, "our police surgeon encountered a minor puzzle concerning the body of the late inspector, rest his summary soul." "Oh, and what might that have been?" Philip was immediately interested. I was not so much. The last thing I wanted to revisit was anything to do with Arlemont, though that was a fool's errand, given that in a few short hours Philip and I would be right back there, in bed together at the least, thank the stars. "You recall that his right knee had suffered some grievous injury, one unlike I, at least, had ever seen on a body, living or dead, for that matter. Well, what do you know? But our surgeon said the very thing to me, as I stood there watching him examine poor Mudge." "That last is astonishing. More so, I take it, than the other," Philip replied. "Yes, indeed. I am no medical man, quite obviously, and can only judge by sheer experience. But he was almost vexed. He even went so far to ask me if there had been any animals in the area, such as large birds, ravens, or vultures, for instance, because that was the only thing that came to his mind upon investigating said injury." "I did not see anything of the kind," Philip recalled. I shook my head. I had not, of course, spent an entire seasonal round at Arlemont, and was thus unaware of the patterns its wildlife might take on. "Neither I, though I reckon we were all rather distracted." "Certainly, if one of these carrion eaters was simply sitting up in a tree, we would not have noted it," said I, more interested in the melange which passed for supper in the place than any injury to the knee, or elsewhere for that matter. "Quite so. Well, that was an end to it. And yet it was not an end to it, for our surgeon did himself desire to see the site where the body lay, and so I took him out there just this morning, as it happened. I saw nothing more of interest, but he did." "Good Lord, my man, don't leave us in suspense," Philip expostulated with some little melodrama and a wink to Miss Thorne, which I ignored, for now. "He does that all the time, and it is 1 in 10 that he has anything of interest to say when he does relieve such tension," Miss Thorne chirped knowingly. "Bone fragments." "Bone fragments." Philip was nonplussed. He raised his brows before continuing. "Would that not be consistent with a bird pecking away at an open wound?" "That is what I put to him, and though he at first nodded, I could tell he was unsatisfied by such an account. And yet, as he produced no alternative, I filed my official report a few hours ago and closed the case." Good, I thought. Now, my dear friends, can we simply enjoy the rest of the evening together? I was about to put that into words when I felt Philip stiffen up, and not in any pleasant manner. I wonder now, he began, but I elbowed him in the rib, and he ceased graciously enough. Miss Thorne had now given me a wink, and not being used to being winked at by other girls, well, I should not say quite that much, given my school chums and I utilized this otherwise lurid display often enough in our petty intrigues. I tapped my spoon on the side of my dish in response to her, which allowed the men to break into laughter. Has there been any news of note at the Great House? I should so like a tour. Emma was sincerely interested. Not for me to issue invitations of that sort, but we shall certainly ask on your behalf. Phipps? Philip replied, and then passed it off. Ah, I would think that we might well be unwelcome at such a time, having been a bother of late, don't you know? I did know, but of course it would have been surpassingly rude to express such a sentiment aloud. Well, of course, that too I cannot speak to. Now, it does occur to me that when you and I were examining your late inspector's body, well, I noted that his trouser leg was covering said injury, and so one would think that if it had been a bird, or some other such creature, it would not have had the impetus to replace the trouser leg over the wound it had itself been pecking at. Philip had been forced to pause due to the fact that I had firmly stepped on the toe of his right shoe to express my continuing displeasure at the run of conversation. No, I had not thought of that, but then again, the only other point of obvious access for a carrion bird would have been the head, specifically the eye socket, and that space, as we saw, not to spoil our suppers, was otherwise occupied. Phipps replied casually. He clearly was not giving Philip's latest insight, if it were so, much credence. Quite so, good man. Well, it is a trifle, no doubt. I feel the weight of such a tragedy, though, and since it held both irony and mere mischance due to human error, I wonder if tragedy is quite the correct term to apply. He now looked aside to me. I gave him a bit of a glare, and then he blinked at me with affection and concluded, Well, you are the authority in rhetoric. It seems to me more a question of semantic meaning, but unless you want a lecture, and I dare say you need one of some sort or other, why not let us finish our food in lighter atmosphere? To this Miss Thorne had openly guffawed, and then gave her man a firm elbow, as if in agreement with myself. I had now occasion to look her over more closely, if discreetly. She was pretty, certainly, perhaps all of 19 at most, but who was I to talk? She very clearly enjoyed the company of Phipps, who, in my estimation, had every chance of becoming as accomplished as had been his mentor. Her burgundy taffeta stood off in contrast to her dark brown orbs, a Celt, then, or even a Druid, if one believed in such heritability. You are Welsh, I take it. I sought to change the topic. My family is from Wales, but I've never seen the place. And you have no inclination to. Isn't England stiff enough for you, Miss Endicott? Wales is a miles backward glance from even here. This was interesting, and aside from the men chuckling about such an observation, with which I certainly did not disagree, I made to pursue it. What stopped me was not her actually looking at me, or the way she looked from across the table, but rather her entire look, if you will, her features and her visage. The only person I had seen that remotely looked like her was Olivia herself. Miss Thorne was a much lighter version thereof, to be sure, but the resemblance gave me enough pause to retreat by way of some tangent I improvised in the moment. Are you not teaching at the same school you yourself attended? And so on. I made it out that I might be interested in myself applying, and to this she reacted almost with glee. I had been placing a good deal of faith in Philip's ability to hammer things out locally, and thenceforth set his sights on an ocean crossing of permanent proportions. The evening wore on more or less pleasantly, so by the time Philip and I disembarked the new carriage that the Montford solicitor had himself sold to them, along with an energetic pair of greys, it was past 10 o'clock. Welcome back. I am delighted to see you both again. Sarah was still up, seeming like she had begun to invert her hours of waking life. I looked upon her with compassion. I motioned to Philip and asked if he could give us a moment. He bowed to Sarah, and she dipped. This had become more than self-satire, or yet the mockery of too formal custom. It had become a personalist flirtation, designed to never offend, or yet compel itself to become anything further. It was a kind of joking relationship, as the ethnographers had recently discovered in primitive societies, specifically with one's mother-in-law, which made me wonder if such a domestic tension were a human universal. Sarah, my dear, you are looking worn out, weary. I feel absorbed in a life that I never imagined for myself. Even the presence of a completely new staff has changed the mood of this house, and of course your beau as well. For the better, I trust. Oh, yes, but, well, I feel as if I am oddly living in someone else's home. That is a disoriented feeling. To see all of the familiar objects and rooms, to sit in the familiar furniture and look out of the windows, but I am no longer myself, no longer the person I have known myself to be. Again, I hope, indeed I have prayed, however anachronistic that may now be, for you to undergo just such a change. In time you will come to know your new self far better than that previous. But she gave me a doubting look. I wonder. I too have prayed, but no one has answered. It is said that one should be grateful too for unanswered orison, and so I place my tiny faith in that each day. This was a peculiar confession, but in communicating it to me, it seemed to lighten her burden. Sarah, Philip is quite taken with you, as I knew he would be, but this is a good thing. It vouchsafes our vow to you and Olivia. I would never, ever, Laura, seek him out. You know that much. Of course. My gods, after everything you have lived through, and at your age, well, am I one to talk? We are but 5 years apart, after all. We are worlds apart. I first thought, as you know, to seduce him. Olivia has her powers, and I have mine, and they are equally unassailable. But I would never use such a power against a friend, and that is what constitutes the distance between us, at least for now. You know how to be that true friend. I am merely the one who is blessed by being so befriended. Not wholly true, dear thing, not even now, but I understand you, and I thank you. It is more than a compliment, what you have just said to me. I knew I could trust you, right when Violette attacked us, even before I killed her. But my sister has not had that kind of, shall we say, action, with you fully present. I sincerely hope she never does. But I do not hope that, for it is the one way in which to absolutely ensure her trust. I gave her a look of askance to this, though I was certain she was correct. No, I do not mean to say that we shall intend a contrivance, but if something else occurs, another crisis, then seek to be by her side, right there and then. With her, yes. Yes, Sarah, God forbid, if that means anything in our time, but yes, I do understand. And perhaps you can at least tell her that I would be there with her, in spite of our differences. Apparently this was good enough, for the time being, at least for the lady of the house. She embraced me and then trotted off in her girlish manner, up the stairs and to bed, presumably. Not having a personal maid, none of the three of us did, of course, meant that everything private remained private. That was the good side of it. But now I did have someone of the sort, I realized with a bit of a smirk, as I let Philip undress me, prelude to a yet more interesting recreation. By the time this had concluded, at least for the moment, I was dropsy. Sleep came over me like some inland sea, if death were the wider ocean. Yes, wider, deeper, and murkier by far. There had been times in Philip's absence when I had no care which would drown me each night, sea or ocean, but now I was reminded of just how precious was the sea.